So that's such a valid and highlighted point, is especially if we're speaking to like young men, and how important it is that how we need strong men, but how we also need to double down on how we have the power to like choose. And when you can choose the right woman, man, it sets you up for a completely different trajectory of life. And that is one thing that I know without a shadow of doubt, that I am like, it doesn't matter the season of life. I could be in a valley, that I can still say I'm blessed beyond measure.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Ignition Path Podcast. I have a very special guest today. Before we get to him, though, don't forget to like, share, subscribe. And while listening to this episode, if my guest or I say anything that someone that you know needs to hear, don't forget to hit that share button and just push it right out to them so they can get it. So today's guest is actually a guy who I met on an introductory call, who I found out through the process of talking to him and his business partner that they were having some issues with their podcast production. And since I do podcast production, I offered up my services. So this is my very first client that is now my first client who's a guest on the Ignition Path podcast. Matt, welcome to the show.
Hey, Kyle, what's up, man?
Hey, what's
Super
up?
excited to be on the Ignition podcast.
Yeah, no problem. We don't have your sidekick or who, I don't know who's sidekick for who. You guys are best friends, so you guys are each other's sidekick. But Dr.
Right.
Alessi is your business partner, who is also part of the Full Fuel podcast. I always mess that one up. Matt Tack and Dr. Alessi run the Full Fuel podcast. It's a podcast that's out there already on YouTube and all the major areas, but they're just now under the umbrella of the GPS podcasting solution. So they have some great episodes, some great content. But today, we're going to talk about Matt and his path to becoming an entrepreneur and how that happened. So, Matt, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, what you did before you became an entrepreneur, or have you always been an entrepreneur? Like, tell us a little bit about that path.
Yeah, so I think it's a little bit of both. And I don't think I know. So I went to college, but, growing up, I had an entrepreneur bug in me, I guess you could say. I was always dealing baseball cards, and I was always doing various things throughout my early childhood and adolescence, like baseball cards, like collecting baseball cards. You should see my collection of cards. It's pretty amazing. I was super organized, had tabs on them, knew what every single one of them were, knew all my Michael Jordan cards, and then I would deal them to my friends, right? Hey, can we barter? So I guess that, that might have been the early side of it. And then sports played a huge part. I've always been super competitive. So I was always, I think that there is a derivative of kind of that entrepreneur in you when you hit a certain of athletics. And so I was a pretty good basketball player growing up, as you can see the rock in the background. I love me some ball. But that didn't come out without some hardship. So I graduated from high school. And my full intention and my dream was to play Division I basketball.
Okay.
I got a couple JUCO school offers, but I had a really bad attitude towards that. I was like, I'm a D1 talent. Like, I need D1. One thing I just always had in my head was to beat my dad. My dad was a Division II basketball player and athlete, and I always wanted to beat him for some reason. I had the competition, and when I didn't get the offers, I got really a bad attitude. So I actually went to Oakland University, which during that time frame, I actually worked for a company called Student Painters. And so that was my first taste of entrepreneurism. That's in the Midwest, so in Ohio and Michigan. And so that was my first taste in running a painting company. And there was a few things that I actually learned throughout that process, was to really be intentional, be a really, really good painter. We were some of the best painters. So I had extreme attention to detail. I didn't like when guys got sloppy, got paint on the roof or something like that. I wanted detail, because I wanted to leave my clients with a lot of a good product, right? And so, but there was, so that was my first taste. But when I got out of college, for some reason, I didn't push towards starting a painting company, which would have been phenomenal if I look back now. But I just started a 9-to-5 job. I graduated in finance accounting. I got into an accounting job at American Axle, and man,
when we were talking about what we were going to talk about, I joked around about you being an accountant. I didn't know you actually were an accountant.
I actually was, man. That's so funny. Yeah, I thought you even knew that. That's hilarious.
No.
So yeah, I was an accountant, and I knew sitting behind a desk was not for me. Like severe ADHD, and I became almost inoperable. I just like was tight. When you chained me down to a desk, it was bad news. And data entry wasn't my thing. So anyways, I just didn't really love the job, but I met a lot of really good people. And one thing I do, I'm always a curious nature. I have a curiosity nature in me, where I just always want to learn and grow. My wife now, but girlfriend at the time, she had moved out to Washington, D.C., and I was like, I need a change of pace. Like, I need to get out of southeastern Michigan. That's where I've grown up, 24 years there. I'm like, I got to get out of here.
I'd get out of Michigan too, man.
And so I have much respect.
You know, I'm a Buckeye, so.
I have much respect for the Midwest. But at the end of the day, you know, it's one of those things where I heard this quote one time. It's change of place plus change of space or pace equals change of perspective. And so that's what I needed at that time in my life. So I chased my girlfriend down to Washington, D.C., which I had a complete different perspective in life when I went to it. Was a culture shock for me. I was swimming. I was just treading water. I got a job with Accenture, which is a Fortune 50 company that I did project management for. And it showed me a lot of like just being disciplined with the financials. I was on the back end of things, of really understanding KPIs and how to run a business just purely from the financial side. So anyways, I worked for them for 7 years, but then on the outside of that, I had to make a decision. I got into a sales job, and I was about 7 months into the sales job. It was door to door. It was more B2B, and man, did I hate it. What we had since then moved from Washington, D.C. My wife finished up law school. I got married to her, and we moved down to Tampa. And it was one of those things where I had to make a switch. It was killing me from the inside. And so she's like, go do whatever, like figure it out. And so I did, and I got into real estate. So that was my first, I guess, full-time entrepreneurial endeavor. Was real estate. I got into the Airbnb world on the management side, and then real estate investing. And then that since has transpired into many other things over the past 10 plus years now. But that was it. That's what's kind of spawned my entrepreneurial journey. And I'll tell you what, it hasn't been an easy one, especially not this year, but I wouldn't take it back for the world.
Right. All right. Well, thanks so much for sharing that. You know, it's crazy with the way that everybody has their path and how they get there. You know, as we've talked about before in general, and as you know, I'm a full-time paramedic. I went to the corporate world, and I learned what anxiety was. I learned what chained to a desk meant, you know, where I've used to be in the healthcare field. Okay, yes, I go to a place and I work at that is, you know, hospitals to me are kind of corporate, if you will, but I wasn't in the corporate sector. I was on the patient care side of things, which made me go every day was different. No day was the same, right? Which helps our ADHD brains. You don't want mundane and the always, right? So talk a little bit more about when you decided to make that change. You know, luckily you had the support of your girlfriend or wife at the time, and that's a huge part of it because, you know, I know that times when I've changed my path on certain things, you know, I've even had people doubt me in my life, just like, well, you're not gonna succeed at that. So talk a little bit about how important it was for her support and what that did for you to have the confidence to try new things.
Such a valid point and such a great question to highlight and bring up, because to be honest with you, and I get emotional every time I talk about this, but me stepping into my entrepreneurial journey, the power of having somebody like that by your side is extremely extraordinary. My wife and I just have gone through the ups and the downs through it all. She's seen me, and she's been able to weigh in heavily on some just various decisions that, you know, I've had to make. and transitions I've had to make. One recently of shutting down Nutritious. And to have somebody that like believes in you without a shadow of a doubt, is honestly, it's supernatural. So it's something that we go into every day is protecting the peace of our household. And it's one thing where I know I get to live that out. And just having a woman that can stick by your side. She's extremely loyal. She works. She's an attorney. By far the smartest individual that I've ever met in my entire life.
Good answer. Good answer.
By far, I know
you're telling the truth. Yeah.
I physically don't respect anyone as much as I respect her. That's just something that is extremely powerful and that we've been able to double down on as a couple. But
nice.
I wouldn't have the balls to probably do very much in this life without the power of her and just being able to cultivate that relationship. So that's such a valid and highlighted point, is especially if we're speaking to like young men, and how important it is that how we need strong men, but how we also need to double down on how we have the power to like choose. And when you can choose the right woman, man, it sets you up for a completely different trajectory of life. And that is one thing that I know without a shadow of a doubt, that I am like, it doesn't matter the season of life. I could be in a valley, that I can still say I'm blessed beyond measure.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, and that's so important. And for those out there listening that may not have that spouse or that partner that can give them the support, or maybe you're not getting support from them, I urge you to have that partner listen to this episode and have that open conversation about how important it is as entrepreneurs to have someone believe in you. Luckily, my entrepreneurial path kind of went through multiple things. Landscaping, building things, creating my voiceover business, creating different businesses, helping my wife build her own business with her Scentsy products, and it's one of those things where she sees you as someone who can like imagine something and then get it done. Whether it's stuck for good or whether it was just a season of your life that it happened, that person there knowing that support is so important. So if you don't have that person in your life, I highly suggest to find an accountability partner that can help you be with that knows you well as if it is a spouse that is that person, to make sure that if that conversation or that doubt is there, to have the real conversation about, hey, listen, this is very important to me. This is something that, you don't tell them what to do for you, but lead the conversation into supportive conversation and be supportive when you go to them to talk to them about it. So that's a great point. I'm so glad you shared that with us, and thanks so much. Now, fast forward a little bit with through the real estate process. How did you when did Dr. Alessi come into the picture, and how did you partner up with him in your endeavor for Full Fueled and for whatever else you guys are doing now?
Yeah, I got into this biohacking, kind of trait. I would say roughly I started introducing myself probably about 5 or 6 years ago. I always tell people, those things start with like cold showers and stuff, and then you're reading books, and then you're doing this and that. So I've done real estate for a while now, so probably the better part of the last 9 years. It was actually when I was 28 was when I made my first real estate investment, an Airbnb, and then that's it. Since has been transpired into a few other things.
When I was 28, they didn't even have Airbnbs yet. It was still just rental properties.
So then it was actually through the podcast, so Full Field podcast. I did one in 2020 and really enjoyed it. So I had a co-host, but then stopped that. It just wasn't the appetite of what I'd need to focus on during that season. It was very much business, so I had to double down on business at that time, which I'm glad I did. But then it also was like, hey, what how can we get media out? And one thing I wanted to do was start another podcast, but I did not want to do it myself. It was just something that I wasn't willing to do. So I was searching around and I was asking a few people. I asked few people, but there's so many people that are non-committal, right? I can't do it. And then it's also the seasons of life, whether they actually physically can. So it's probably good. But through, again, I think it was an element of divine intervention. He came into a co-working space that my buddy owns. And he's like, Matt, what's up? And we had met each other in 2017, but he had moved away and he was in Colorado for a while, and he had just recently moved back, and he had purchased a clinic down the road from where we were at. And so we met, got lunch, hung out a few other times, and really, I found some synergy with him. And I was like, hey, would you be open to doing a podcast with me? And he's like, yeah, I'll think about it. And then he kind of shut me off the first time around. And then I was like, well, let's just get in the studio. Let's run one and see how we ebb and flow. And there was a cadence. There was immediate, just synergy that we had with one another, just talking about various topics and longevity, just health, fitness, what that means. And so we operate off of 6 pillars: mind, spirit, work, fuel, movement, sleep. And so just as we evaluate and evolve in those areas, that's what we, focused our topics on. We just realized, wow, man, this is cool. Let's keep on doing this. So we got about 50 episodes underneath our belt. And then at that time, I was like, man, would you want to potentially do other things together as far as business activities? And through consideration, I was like, maybe we could help out with Alessi Functional Health, which is the chiropractor, functional wellness brick and mortar that he owns in Tampa Bay. And he was open to it. And so we talked about it a little bit more, and we kind of came up with a game plan of what that would look like. And so over the course really of the past 7-8 months, so I invested into his clinic in January. I've taken on more of an ops role. And then he handles all the in-clinic patient care along with our other associate doc and our staff there. And so we're just growing that, letting God really lead us in that area in terms of where that's going to go. We definitely want to grow into new locations, but that transpired over roughly around 2 years ago at this point. Not quite 2 years ago. We started our podcast actually last September. So that from when we started our podcast, it's been a full year. So that's where I started getting into the more full-time functional wellness space in terms of how we're adding value to number one, our clients, but then also the guys in our mastermind and our coaching.
That's great. Well, that's fantastic. And that you found someone that you have that synergy with. It's so important. And the fact that you guys, and I've watched your podcasts and now that I've edited a few, you guys have a lot of fun and there, the information, the guests you bring on are quality guests that talk about a lot of things in the men's health space. And you do have women that come on and talk about their journeys in the health and wellness as well. And I think it all together, it's a really great podcast to tune into. So I would invite everyone to go out and find the Full Fueled podcast, look at all their post productions of their podcast from last year, all their new ones that they're bringing out. Being on the side that I am, being the producer of it now, I know that they've got a lot of stuff in the bank getting ready to come out, and it's just going to be more and more great information and great stuff that they're going to be bringing to you. So talk a little bit about where the name Full Fueled came from and the concept behind it, and is that something where the Full Fueled podcast is going to be, and you mentioned, Alessi Functional Health, and then what your business is called is Full Fueled, the umbrella under all of that, and how that came about.
Yeah, that's I got ordained, so we were praying about it. We were trying to figure out hey, what would be a good name for the podcast, and what would embody something that we're trying to put out in the world. And so we just came up with Full Field Media. That was where honestly, Dr. Alessi was praying about it. He's like, man, we need a name to go by. What Full Fueled means to us specifically is how are you living life, on a full tank, right? So
Gotcha.
You are playing off of fulfilled, but full fueled, where no one honestly can be honest with themselves and be like, yeah, I wish I was 3/4 full. I wish it was a half a tank full. No, you want to be full fueled, and you want to be operating on all cylinders. And so that's where we had to then we wrote down our pillars. You won't hear us talk about our pillars much in the podcast, but this is where they drive from, right? Is fuel, what we're putting into our body. So that's like the nutrition layer. Movement, how we're moving our body on a daily basis, right? So just our bodies are meant to move. And as Americans, we're becoming more and more static, right? Things are becoming easier. And how do we have that intentional discomfort? Because movement typically is uncomfortable. So then sleep as a derivative of that is this burn yourself out, operate off of 3 to 4 hours of sleep, work 80 hours a week. That's not living full fueled, right? So how we optimizing our sleep, running our metrics. We're big believers in either the Whoop band or the Oura ring to understand your sleep metrics. You don't always have to wear them, but I would recommend, 5 to 6 months, start measuring that, get data for your sleep, because that's ultimately how you're going to be optimized the next day. And then mind, spirit, and work are the following 3 that we operate. The mind is what are you operating by? How are you fueling it? Who are you surrounding yourself with? How are you lifting yourself up, whether that be through reading books, having a mentor, you having friends that are going to elevate you? But how are you consciously thinking about what you're actually putting into your brain? So that's the mind. Spirit is definitely something outside of us. I believe we're spiritual beings and we have this borrowed shell. So what is the spirit within us driving? And so for me, just being with more of a Christian-based background, I'm a believer in Jesus. How am I implementing that, right? So I do daily devotionals and I have my abide time and how I operate. So spirit is very much a forefront and focus for me. And then work is, of course, that's the creation of who we are, right? We always need to work. And as an entrepreneur, I was like, dude, I'm never going to retire because I'm always creating something, right? Yeah. So you're creating a new narrative and a new story every day. And so then how do we go within that? So really that encapsulates full fueled, how are we operating on these 6 pillars that allow us to live that full fueled life. But that was downloaded onto Dr. Alessi and I love it. And so we ran with it. So that's our media portion. And then Alessi Functional Health is our brick and mortar and how we serve the people of Tampa Bay.
That's awesome. That's a great explanation. That's a lot deeper than I've ever heard you explain full fueled. So I'm glad I asked that question, because it gives me the passion and the understanding, and then I can serve you guys better by knowing your path and knowing your pillars, and also help you with. I meet so many people through podcasting as you do. There's going to be, literally while you're talking, I'm like, I have 7 people now I will need to get you in contact with for being on their podcast, or you being on or them being on your podcast, because there's an alignment of all of, there's 6 different pillars that have something to do with someone I know that I can introduce you to. So that's one great thing I love about podcasting. Not only is it information that we can provide to our listeners and become an authority in our space, but it's also that networking and that that ideal client possibility that you can meet through podcasting. And that's why I love it so much. So I'm so happy that you guys did have that. I chuckled when you said downloaded on a Dr. Alessi. I'm like, well, I've never heard it said that way. It's like you pray about it and then it gets downloaded onto you. So the next time something comes to me after I've been praying or thinking and putting it up to the universe, when it comes to me, I'm going to be like, it's been downloaded. Sweet. It took a while to get it. Must have been dial up. It wasn't high. It wasn't the fiber optic like I have now. But so I love that little takeaway. When something comes to you, it's downloaded to you in today's terms. That's so great.
We'll think about that too. And this is why I say we're like spiritual beings, is because the shell that we have, our brain is very much it's a hard drive system, right? Yeah. And so we're borrowing data from what's not really new. But that's what I love about the parasympathetic state, is that when you can open your mind up, you're willing to receive a lot more. Now, one note that very few people do, and I try to do all the time, you'll see note cards all around my desk. You'll see my journal filled without stuff, is because those are the downloads that are coming. And I always believe, I heard this quote was, the shortest pencil is longer than the longest memory, right? Yeah. And so you want to write those things down as they come to you, because you're, oh man, I thought about that one time. And then in your reticular activating system, there's a double imprinting when you write it down.
Yeah.
So just, for all the people that are out there listening, make sure you write stuff down because you're getting downloaded all the time. We're creators.
Exactly. That's a great takeaway as well, is that quote. And absolutely, I wrote down some things a couple months ago, and I found that piece of paper, and I went, oh, well, that came true, and that came, oh, wait, this whole list came true. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's awesome. So, it definitely is part of the universe and part of that spiritual being that you and I both believe in, of course. So, whatever belief you believe in, as long as it's something that it's bigger than you, and you realize that you're just this little speck in the world of things. But that speck can also be very appropriate to help others and serve others. I'm a paramedic. I serve my community every third day, and now I serve podcasters through helping them get their message out. And I know that you and Dr. Alessi serve your clients and the people that you reach out to through the pillars that you have on Full Fuel. So thanks so much for coming on to the Ignition Path podcast. Tell us real quick before we say goodbye how they find the Full Fuel podcast, how they find you, how they, do you have a LinkedIn or any of that stuff? Whatever you have, of course, it's going to be in the show notes below. But just real quick, tell us the easiest way for people to find you if they're just listening to this.
Yeah, first and foremost, we're trying to grow our podcast, the Full Fuel podcast. That's on every syndication source, so you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, all the sources. Then I'm on Instagram at human.optimizer. Dr. Alessi's at Full Fuel Doc. So if you want to check him out, we're always putting out good content there. And then you can find us at Matthew Tack or Alessi Functional Health on Facebook. That's where we're at. We post a lot of good quality content out there as well. So that's where you can find us. You can always reach out to us. And then if you're in the Tampa Bay area, always come see us at Alessi Functional Health. We'll fulfill your pain-free future. So we do chiropractic care, soft wave, we have infrared, cold plunge, we have it all there.
Ooh, okay, great. Yeah, I'm a firm believer in chiropractic. I've gotten out of bed a few different times in my life and had to crawl to the car to get myself to my chiropractor, and then they make some adjustments and I can actually walk out, and I still have to have a few more sessions, of course, but I've believed in chiropractic care for years, and it's definitely a wonderful thing to have because they have that holistic look at things. And every chiropractic office that I've ever been in does have a secondary benefit of all the other different avenues that you spoke of. So it sounds like it's a perfect synergy of what you created, what he had available, and I'm just so happy that you guys ended up making a business to help people out there. And I'm glad that you guys have a podcast. I've watched some of your episodes. The one episode, they did a podcast one time where the cameraman was walking with them down the street. That was a podcast, and they made a suggestion, and the very next day I was like, well, I'm doing that right now. I can turn around and walk backwards. I'm like, what they said about walking backwards makes sense to me. Let me try it. And I did it. And I'm like, cool. So once again, it's not just about spitting content out there. It's actually using the tools that we give you during podcasts, whether it's me or whether it's, Matt and Dr. Alessi or whoever else you listen to. There's always some really good content that we have in these podcasts. So please, please, please go find their podcast. Of course, YouTube is another place you can find their podcast and subscribe to them. Subscribe to the Ignition Path podcast, and we'll try to just get your message out there to the world. And if anybody has any questions, don't be afraid to reach out to Matt. He's super approachable and has a lot of great information. I've learned a lot already from him just being his producer with him and Dr. Alessi. So, Matt, thanks so much for coming on the Ignition Path podcast. Anything else you want to say before we roll?
No, thanks, Kyle. I guess one thing I always like leaving with the people with. You're the narrator of your story, so every decision is an action for who you want to become.
That's awesome. All right. Thanks so much, Matt. Take care.
Thanks, Kyle.
Thank you for listening to Ignition Path, fueling the entrepreneurial fire.